I was walking out of the corner pharmacy when I saw it happen. Mr. Harold Dixon, an elderly man in his 70s with a kind smile and slow gait, was standing at the bus stop just like he did every Thursday after his checkup. He wore his usual pressed slacks and a flat cap that looked older than I was. Everyone in the neighborhood knew him. He volunteered at the local library and taught chess to the kids at the rec center. Today, though, something felt off. A patrol car had pulled up fast, way too fast for a quiet street like ours. The officer, a white guy maybe in his late 30s with buzzed hair and mirrored sunglasses, stepped out and yelled something. Mr. Dixon didn't react quickly, he was hard of hearing, and that seemed to make the cop even angrier. Before anyone could understand what was going on, the officer stormed up to him, pulled something from his belt, and sprayed a wide streak of bright red paint right across Mr. Dixon's head. The sound it made, it wasn't just the hiss of the spray. It was the gasp that followed, from everyone watching. Mr. Dixon flinched and froze, red dripping down his graying temples, confusion and humiliation in his eyes. He didn't even try to wipe it off. The officer just stood there like it was nothing. Like he'd tagged a wall. Then I heard the voice. Low. Controlled. And terrifying. Put that can down. Now. And that's when I saw him, stepping out from the crowd like a storm about to break. Mr. Dixon's son. The man who stepped forward was tall, calm, and looked like he didn't raise his voice unless it meant something. He wore a crisp gray jacket over a plain black t-shirt, clean jeans, and heavy boots that thudded on the pavement as he approached. His eyes were locked on the officer, and they weren't just angry, they were cold. Calculated. The cop turned, still holding the spray can, and tried to puff himself up. Sir, back away. This is a police, you're done, the man interrupted, flat and final. That's my father. Gasps rippled through the growing crowd. A woman nearby put her hand over her mouth. I felt my own breath catch in my throat. The officer blinked. Look, I don't know who you think you, the man reached into his jacket, slowly and deliberately. No sudden movements. He pulled out a black leather badge holder and flipped it open. Gold. Federal. The silence hit like a punch. I'm Agent Marcus Dixon, Department of Internal Affairs, he said, voice like steel. And you just made a career-ending mistake on a civilian with no cause. The officer stammered. I thought he matched there was no call. No match. No warrant, Marcus snapped. And no reason to deface a senior citizen standing at a bus stop. I swear I saw the blood drain from the officer's face. Behind him, Mr. Harold Dixon just stood there quietly, paint still dripping, dignity intact, but barely. And for the first time that day, I saw the cop take a single step backward. The officer opened his mouth to protest, but Marcus raised a hand, firm, commanding. Not a single word came out. I want your badge and weapon. Right now, Marcus said, pulling out his phone and tapping it as if he were calling in backup. This scene is being documented. People around us had already started recording. Phones were up. Eyes were locked on the officer like he was the main event, and he knew it. I didn't mean, the cop muttered, hand trembling as he removed his badge and sidearm. It was just, he looked like what? Marcus asked, stepping closer. His voice was low but sharp, slicing through excuses. An elderly man with a hat waiting for the bus. What made that criminal behavior? No one answered. No one could. The officer looked down, eyes darting, like he was realizing for the first time that he had been caught red-handed, on camera, in broad daylight, humiliating an innocent man for no justifiable reason. Get on the curb and sit. Don't speak. Wait for the state investigator, Marcus said. The officer obeyed. Slowly. Silently. Like a scolded child. Then Marcus turned to his father. Dad, he said softly, stepping up and gently wiping some of the red from the older man's forehead with a folded handkerchief. "I'm so sorry you had to go through this." Harold gave a faint smile. "You always did know how to show up when it mattered." The entire block felt like it was holding its breath. More neighbors began to arrive, drawn by the buzz spreading like wildfire. By now, a half-circle had formed around the scene, people from the apartments, shopkeepers, even the bus driver who had pulled over to watch. Phones were still recording. Nobody was shouting. Nobody needed to. The silence spoke louder than words. A woman from the flower shop came over with a wet cloth and handed it to Marcus, eyes full of concern for Mr. Dixon. He nodded in thanks, still dabbing gently at his father's forehead. The paint was stubborn, bright, sticky, and humiliating, but Marcus cleaned it off without hesitation, like he'd done it 100 times before. "That man needs to be arrested," someone whispered in the crowd. "Fired," someone else added. "Shamed," said a third. But Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Everything was already in motion. Behind him, the disgraced officer sat slouched on the curb, his badge now in Marcus's pocket, his radio removed. He looked completely powerless, and completely exposed. A black SUV with government plates pulled up just then, and 2 agents in suits stepped out. They approached quietly, respectfully, nodding to Marcus. "Transfer of custody," one asked. Marcus handed over the officer's badge, weapon, and a brief rundown of what happened. No drama. No shouting. Just facts. Mr. Dixon stood quietly through it all, his hands steady at his sides, watching as justice unfolded, not from behind a bench, but from the heart of the very street where had just been disrespected. As the agent led the now handcuffed officer away, a murmur passed through the crowd. It wasn't anger this time, it was something else. Respect. Admiration. And awe for a man who didn't come in loud, but left the whole block silent. Once the officer was escorted into the black SUV and driven off, the neighborhood seemed to exhale. The tension that had gripped the block slowly eased, but the impact remained heavy in the air. Marcus stood tall next to his father, offering quiet support. His calm demeanor had never cracked, not once. People had begun whispering his name like it carried weight now, like it belonged to someone who mattered far beyond their street. A teenager stepped forward from the crowd, eyes wide. "Mister, are you really with Internal Affairs?" Marcus turned toward the boy and nodded once. "Yes." Someone else chimed in, an older man holding a dog leash. "And Mr. Dixon, he's your dad." "We didn't know," Harold chuckled lightly, brushing his hand over his now clean forehead. "I never needed folks to know. Just wanted to read my books and ride the bus." That got a few soft laughs, the kind that break tension without needing much sound. But Marcus wasn't done. He took a few steps forward and looked around at everyone. "Listen," he said, voice steady and measured. "This wasn't just about disrespect. It was a violation. Of dignity. Of trust. Of everything that uniform is supposed to stand for." A few heads nodded slowly. "I didn't come here as a son. I came here as someone sworn to hold that badge accountable. That officer didn't just disrespect my father, he disrespected every one of you who follows the law and expects to be treated with decency." Silence again. Then clapping, soft at first, then growing. Harold rested a hand on Marcus's shoulder, proud but quiet. It was only now that people started to realize who Mr. Dixon really was, not just a retiree, not just a kind old man at the bus stop. He was the kind of man who raised someone strong enough to change everything in 10 seconds flat. Later that evening, the story had already made it online. Clips from cell phones were being shared across platforms, each showing the moment Marcus stepped in, revealed his badge, and took control. But there was one video that stood out. A local journalist who had rushed to the scene got a brief interview with Marcus as he and his father prepared to leave. "Agent Dixon, if you don't mind," the reporter asked, holding out a small mic. "What message do you hope people take away from what happened today?" Marcus looked at his father for a moment. Mr. Dixon gave a small nod. Then Marcus turned to the camera. "Don't let the uniform fool you," he said. "It's not the badge that defines a person, it's their actions when no one's watching, and their accountability when everyone is." The reporter was stunned into silence for a second, then whispered, "Thank you." As they walked away, Harold leaned slightly toward his son. "You always were good with words." Marcus grinned. "I got it from you. You just used them quieter." They crossed the street together. No escort. No parade. Just father and son walking home like nothing had happened, even though everything had changed. And across the city, people were watching. Listening. Rethinking what it means to truly serve the public. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Marcus returned to the bus stop alone. He stood there for a while, watching the same corner where it had all gone down, quiet now, almost peaceful. The red paint had been cleaned off the sidewalk overnight. Someone had even placed a small bouquet of wildflowers on the bench, a note attached that simply read, "We see you, Mr. Dixon." Marcus bent down, read it, and smiled faintly. He tucked the note into his coat pocket. A city bus pulled up and paused longer than usual. The driver leaned out slightly. "You his son?" the driver asked. "Yes," Marcus said. "That obvious?" The driver grinned. "He talks about you every Thursday like you're a superhero." Guess he wasn't wrong. Marcus nodded. He ever miss a Thursday? Not in 15 years. The bus rolled away, and Marcus stayed there a few minutes more. Not to make a statement. Not to give another speech. Just to be there, where it all started. Where it almost went too far. Where his father had stood with dignity even when he was humiliated, and where the truth finally stood taller than the badge that tried to break it. 2 days later, a letter arrived at the Dixon residence, hand-delivered, no return address. Marcus opened it while Harold sat in his usual armchair by the window, sipping tea. It was from the precinct's interim chief. No letterhead. Just words that sounded like they'd taken effort to write. "Agent Dixon, there are no excuses for what happened. The officer has been relieved of duty pending full investigation. Sensitivity retraining isn't enough. We're reviewing all field protocols starting this week, and that's because of you. Your father is owed more than an apology. He's owed peace. We can't undo what was done, but we can start making sure it doesn't happen again. If he's willing, we'd like to invite Mr. Dixon to speak to our department next month. Not to forgive, just to be heard. Respectfully, Acting Chief Marshal Marcus passed the letter to Harold. The old man read it slowly, his eyes narrowing just slightly as he reached the end. He set it down on the table beside him, took another sip of tea, and said, "Let's wait and see if they mean it." Marcus smiled. "You thinking about going?" Harold gave a light shrug. "Maybe. If I do, I won't be going to fix anyone. I'll be going so they see who they nearly broke." That silence returned again, deep and strong, like a wall nothing could shake. And for the first time since the incident, Harold looked out the window not with worry, but with pride. A month later, the police department held a closed session training, a rare one, mandatory for every officer on the force. Harold Dixon stood at the front of the room, his hands resting lightly on a podium. No slideshow. No prepared speech. Just him. The room was dead silent. Officers lined the rows, some still skeptical, others humbled. A few couldn't meet his eyes. "I'm not here to shame anybody," Harold began, voice calm but resolute. "But I do want you to understand what it feels like to be seen as a problem, before you're seen as a person." He let the words hang. "I'm 75 years old. I served in the military. I paid my taxes. I've never once raised my voice at a cop." He paused. "But 2 weeks ago, I got tagged like a wall. And nobody stopped it, until my son stepped in. A ripple moved through the room. Several officers shifted in their seats. My son didn't do anything special. He just did what any of you are supposed to do, stop the wrong thing when it starts. There it was. Simple. Final. When he finished, there were no cheers. No forced applause. Just quiet reflection. The kind that meant it landed. Outside, Marcus waited. When Harold stepped out, he looked lighter. Not healed, but seen. Was it worth it? Marcus asked, holding the car door open. Harold gave a slight grin. They'll remember my name now, for the right reason. As they drove home, the city outside moved on, fast, noisy, unaware of the quiet shift that had just taken place. But something had changed. Not just policy. Not just perception. Legacy. And it all started with red paint, a bus stop, and a son who refused to stay silent.